Megalobox is my anime of the spring 2018 season, a season with a lot of strong series worthy of that title. When going into the series, the aspect that caught my eye the most was obviously its retro visuals, with a soundtrack that just screamed Samurai Champloo when I watched the initial trailer. But what kept me watching each week was never the visuals or the music, that was just the icing on the already delicious cake. What truly kept me engaged for 13 weeks was the characters and the personal stories that were being told. Now, I'm not a sports guy by any means. UFC and boxing are really the only ones I'll give a damn about. But even then, I don't go out of my way to follow many matches outside of the big events for the year. With Megalobox, the anniversary project for Tomorrow's Joe, seeing just how unique the visuals and music design was from the initial trailer, I had to give this a go just to see what they would do with this more futuristic approach to boxing. Would it be a gimmick or a unique addition to the sport of boxing, making it stick out from the crowd? And very quickly, the series set itself apart from other series using boxing as its central hook. It was never the mechanical limbs that made this feel new and interesting, but actually the main character Joe right from the first match, and how nearly every episode steered away from the cliches that I was expecting. With each passing episode, you would expect one thing to happen and it would do the exact opposite more times than not. When I think of sports cliches, I think of the underdog rising to the top, finding his rival and wanting to overtake him and become king of the ring, with usually a pretty egotistical personality to boot. Or at the very least, they would shoehorn in some family story about how the boxer is poor and needs money for his family, so he came up with his idea to win a championship. Something like that. Within the very first match, I was convinced it'd be what I've seen done 100 times over, and then some. You have the underdog fighter throwing matches for money. In comes the #1 boxer in the game who's going to fight said underdog. I find one of the most annoying aspects to these underdog stories is the focal character's personality or initial drive to reach the top. The rival Yuri gives Joe a handicap from the very beginning, a common move for a series such as this. The top fighter doesn't think the underdog is a true match and worthy of fighting them, so they fight with one hand so they don't look like they are picking on the little guy. And generally what you'll see happen is the underdog will bitch or moan or something to that nature because he is the best or will be the best, how dare you disrespect my honor, blah blah blah. But Joe gladly accepted the handicap given and had the time of his life fighting a man who didn't take him seriously. This set the mood for Megalobox right away, where it wasn't just going to be boxing cliches for 13 weeks. Sure, you can look at some of the points the series hits, the underdog rising up, fighting the champion who doesn't take him seriously at first, but probably will eventually, but with each note that it hit on, they stepped away from the predictable outcome and allowed for the series to take a more interesting direction with each passing episode. And it was mainly due to the amount of time given to each character in order to flesh them out. Even if you can predict the outcome of a fight, what was challenging to predict was how the characters would react to situations outside of the ring. It constantly played with those expectations, and that's thrilling. What the gear added to the boxing match is actually quite fascinating. The gear is both the most important and least important aspect to the series when you really break it down. From the poster image to all the promotion I saw, gear was what was going to be the focus in these matches, even with the main character Joe. Yet very quickly, Joe becomes known as Gearless Joe and fights in a ring gearless against opponents with enhanced bodies. These suits increase the speed, power, and sometimes even how your punches will connect is determined by your gear. There is enough detail to them, so each fighter has a unique fighting style but also challenge that Joe has to overcome due to his lack of gear, as in order to build a name for yourself, you must set yourself apart from the crowd. What better way than to become a gearless fighter? A risky but highly rewarding move. What I like the most is how if you pay attention, you'll know how someone will throw a punch and you can actually predict it by the sound the gear will make before winding up, or how if you bluff at the right time against the guy who has a suit that fights for him, it won't know what to do and will stop punches mid-swing. It allows for the core aspect of boxing to become a bit more complex, but similar to what we'll see in ordinary matches. Predicting punches based on the sound the suit makes, you do that based on feet placement. Or even bluffing in the middle of a match can catch even the most skilled fighters off guard. But how it's directed and changing the formula up in this way, it lets old techniques become new and exciting, but also doesn't make it feel like gear is just a gimmick for the series, as this gear actually adds new elements or freshens up old ones because of this addition to the matches. Especially because each fighter has a unique enhancement to their body, such as the rival Yuri having his gear be fully implanted into his body and how he makes his own decisions, but everything about his strength is enhanced, yet still feels totally human. He has the true skills of a fighter, but also has this power added to his already dangerous form. But like I said, the gear is also the least important aspect as well. By making Joe a gearless fighter early on, it sets the series up as unpredictable. These suits don't make the fighter is what's most important. But the punches that are being thrown are like heavy machinery closing in on you. To not have any form of gear makes the danger in the ring far higher than the other guy or general boxing. With gear, you have enhanced strength and speed to help deflect damage that's being thrown thrown your way. Joe, however, has to rely on nothing but his own strength. It's high risk, but it's also high reward. Watching the underdog climb up the ranks by being the most risky fighter in the arena, while constantly seeing new gear be introduced with its own perks, makes the art of boxing something completely fresh for the viewer, even if at the core many of the aspects to the gear fights are similar to standard boxing. Now, if Joe wore gear for the entire series, I do think the suits would have felt more gimmicky than they do now, just because it would have felt like just two fighters fighting with enhanced strength and nothing more. But having one man always fighting gearless with the new and unpredictable opponent with gear each match, it helped keep the new mechanic important and not just a one-off gimmick by forcing Joe to adapt in more engaging ways each fight than if he too had gear. Watching how society reacted to this idiot fighting gearless, and how they slowly but surely started rooting for the underdog after enough wins due to the natural skill he possessed and the determination in his eyes, it was just wonderful. Having the boxing be refreshing in this regard but also well choreographed, you overcome a major hurdle in setting yourself apart in the boxing genre. But something equally important is your main and supporting characters. Now, Joe early on was established as a great lead, someone with a personality you enjoyed, and he strikes you as someone you want to root for. But when you add in characters like Mr. Nanbu, the con artist and mentor of Joe, someone who starts off a little scummy, but also seems like he truly does care for Joe, but he does have his own agenda. Following where he starts off to where he ends up and the sacrifices he is willing to make for others, that's breathtaking. A kid like Sacho, who I thought would just be a brat there to torment Joe, became a key player in coaching Joe and gave him a believable reason for wanting to help him rise to the top. You have characters like Shirato, who at the start felt like a plot device to give Yuri a reason to fight, but by the end developed into something much more than just that. Sure, she always had a goal with the gear Yuri was wearing, but they humanized her in a strong way near the end of the series that actually moved me. And most notably, Yuri himself, a character I expected to root against the entire way, became the guy I rooted for the most by the end. Making the focal character likable and well written is easy enough, especially when you'll be focusing on them for 13 episodes straight. But making the antagonist to your main character either equally memorable or even more so, and dedicate enough time to break the core foundation of them down and rebuild them into a totally new person by the end, it takes some serious skill. Yuri's final match will stand out among most anime fights that I've seen for years to come due to how far he was willing to go for that match. It was that good. With nearly every match, they one-up themselves by introducing a new character with their own past and goals, and making nearly every single character arc damn memorable. Having nice looking action doesn't make a good anime. You need story behind those punches in order for it to matter and be memorable, and that's the main strength of the boxing in Megalobox, the stories behind the punches. It set up the characters brilliantly, so you always understood why the new character wanted to take out Joe because of what Mr. Nanbu did to him in the past, or why the other character is so set on destroying Yuri in the finals and will do whatever it takes to get there. But when a match didn't have a great character arc behind it, it was used to flesh out Joe's reputation in the world or help establish him as a fighter. More often than not, however, that was happening alongside supporting characters with just as engaging character arcs as Joe himself and his rise to the top. That's what makes Megalobox so damn great, and what brought it up another level was of course its visual and sound direction. With how the visuals are directed, it feels like a classic 90s anime being presented in a recent Blu-ray remaster. That's pretty damn awesome. You can complain about the deliberate downscaling all you want, but for me, this style works from the first frame up to the very last frame. I won't deny I do wish I could see some of these backgrounds in all their glory, but with how polished the general animation was, with the art direction being done in this classic 90s feel, it helped get the attention of most anime fans this season. It grabbed the viewer's attention by being visually different than anything in the year, and then used that style to play around with how things are generally represented. Already we're taking boxing and reshaping it to be a bit more high-tech, but then by rewinding the visual flair to something reminiscent of the 90s, it becomes this contrast that works out quite well. It feels old school, but at the same time it feels modern because the animation is as polished as one would expect for a modern day sports series, despite the general art looking like it was pulled from the late 90s due to filters and other techniques that were used. Plus the OST is just pure fire. This is my second favorite soundtrack in anime, only just behind Guilty Crown's OST, as this soundtrack doesn't just play solid music, it plays music that enhances nearly every single scene. You'll watch all these anime a season and you'll hear the generic battle music or emotional piece, and you could replace it with any song and the same effect would have been had. Here, however, each song feels important for the scene. I can't tell you the number of times when watching, I would pause an episode just to soak in the music I just heard. Tracks like The Slum, Confession, and Heartwarming are stamped into my brain at this point. Listening to the OST in full, it's one of the most impressive soundtracks I have ever heard, from the number of unique styles presented, but also how memorable a majority of the tracks are with how much they enhance the scenes that they were in. Megalobox is a show that many might think is style over substance because of its unique visual visual style, but I found it to be a show with insane amount of style wrapped around amazing character arcs, taking a beloved manga like Tomorrow's Joe and creating this, an anniversary project for that beloved series, taking the key moments from Tomorrow's Joe but redoing them either completely different or slightly different, while adding in a new mechanic to the boxing ring. It becomes one of the highlights of the year without much struggle. 13 episodes is what we got, and 13 episodes was all we really needed for this round of the story. Even if you aren't a fan of sports series like myself, this is something most will have a fun time with due to the unique take it took on the foundation of the story and staying away from the cliches, and of course the gorgeous visual direction. Now you might be able to predict a lot of the match's outcomes, but what was difficult to predict was how characters would react and evolve with each passing episode. But let me know what you thought of Megalobox down in that comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, remember to leave a like, and if you're new, also be sure to subscribe. As well, you can also head on over to my Patreon to help support what I do, if you so wish. So until next time everyone, please take care, and y'all have a good one.